Now, here's how I do a language exchange. Selfish. Got to be selfish. I don't care if people don't like this. I think it's a good strategy. When I went to language exchanges, I noticed most people there don't really even speak Korean. So like let's just say, for example, it's like 50% Americans, just for example, 50% Koreans, right? Almost everybody will just speak English, right? Almost everybody's just gonna end up speaking English because most people don't speak Korean, right? There's a lot of Koreans who speak a decent amount of English, but not the reverse. Even if you're in Korea, most Americans just don't really speak, or foreigners don't really speak Korean. So when you go to a language exchange, everyone ends up speaking English. But that first year that I was in Korea, 2017 to 2018, February to February, I was frequenting. I would go to language exchanges in Seoul, and I didn't live in Seoul, but I would go there every other weekend or whatever. And you can make friends there. That's the best part. So I would go there to make Korean friends. And the funny part is I'm selfish when it comes to my language learning experience. I don't think you always have to be selfish, but sometimes it pays. And I would go to a language exchange, and because everyone's always speaking English, right? It's like that. I don't want to speak English. I don't want to waste my time, right? Now, I want to make friendships, but I would like to make friendships with the person who actually doesn't really care to get good in English, but just kind of wants foreigner friends, right? The cultural experience, because there's a lot of people who will go to a language exchange, and some of them want to get good at English, but some of them just want to kind of meet foreign friends. Some of them just kind of I would just only speak in Korean. Now, every language exchange is different, but I would just only speak in Korean, right? And I did this on all the apps too, the language exchange apps like Hello Talk, or now they got Tandem. I would just only speak in Korean, because out of 100 people, if I'm only speaking Korean, 90 people will be like, yeah, I don't care. We could just speak Korean. That's cool. 10% will be like, oh, I'm kind of trying to speak English, so I'm sorry, we can't. I'm like, that's fine. But there are plenty of people who are just going to understand that, yeah, okay, you speak Korean? Okay, cool, yeah, whatever, who cares? I was going to speak English today, but actually I don't really feel like it. And then, boom, you're just always in Korean. So I would go to language exchanges with other foreigner friends, and we'd actually get some of them would be too scared to speak Korean. I was just whatever. I don't care if I'm bad. I'm just gonna make friends, and then because if I only speak in Korean, they're gonna speak Korean to me. Perfect. Me only speaking Korean, doubling down, even if I can't, just makes the other person only want to speak in Korean, and then we can that'll be the relationship seed will be Korean opposed to English, and that's fun. So not every friendship has to be a deep friendship. It could be, just an amicable one. And sometimes at the language exchange, you meet that person, oh, hey, and it's in Korean. So even in real life, I was just only looking for Korean. Now, I had some friends who are native English speakers, still to this day, but when I was in Korea, I actively avoided almost every single foreigner as much as possible, because I was like, I'm still not good at the language, and I don't want to waste my time while I'm here. If I was to hang out with foreigners, or non-Koreans rather, then we're going to end up speaking English. I'm going to waste my time. Why am I in Korea if I'm not going to use the language as much as possible? Why would I go to Korea just to speak English? It doesn't make any sense to me, right? Especially I'm going to live there for a year. So I had a couple of friends, and still to this day we're friends, and we had similar interests. We were trying to get good at Korean, someone who's just like me, obsessed with getting good at Korean. So that was a good relationship, right? It's a good relationship. But there's other people who could have been friends. It's they are not really interested in Korean language. It's I'm not going to spend my time with you. Sorry. I got my things to do, and why would I go to Korea? Why would I go to another country and live there for a year and not spend all my time in that language? That makes no sense to me, right? In terms of making a decision before you go, that's what I'm going to do. So while I was there, I would just avoid all foreigners as much as possible. Any real life interactions, I would just try to have it be with a Korean. And it helped, because even those 1%, 2%, 3% of the whole total time spent there, and me listening to podcasts all the time, those little things add up over time, right? That you get good experience. So So for that next year, though, basically that's what I did. I did the same exact thing I did the year before, podcasts all the time, listening all the time. And then I would go to language exchanges for like, to like actually like live a life. You have to meet people, right? Make relationships. And I did that. Same thing though. Podcast, try to study on the side and, make friends. And that's what I did. So not much change except for the daily interaction. So instead of, in New York, daily interaction, you go to a store and you're speaking English. In Korea, you go in a store, you're speaking Korean, right? Well, what do you do when you want to hang out? In America, you might choose American friends. In Korea, choose Korean friends. But the funny thing is actually, in 2016 to 2017, before I went to Korea, I actually only hung out with my friends 3 times. I don't recommend this to everybody. I don't recommend this to most people because not having a social life is not healthy, right? But I was so obsessed with becoming good. I just wanted to spend all my time in Korean before I went to Korea that year, right? 5 months, then a year and a half, like 5 months and then a year. That year, I only hung out with my like college friends 3 times. I remember I could count it. I only hung out 3 times. And it's because I was obsessed. So then when I went to Korea, right? Same thing. Why would I hang out with foreigners? That makes no sense. I'm in Korea. I should do it as much as possible in Korean, right? As much as possible. This was my mindset. I'm a little more relaxed now. I don't think I'm as obsessive. But I do go hard. That's kind of my personality. But yeah, I don't think that's very healthy. I think have a healthy lifestyle and relationships. You don't have to go 100% on something, but if you do, you do. I don't recommend it though. But yeah, so that's what I did. So let's review real quick. 2015 August, 2016 January, speaking for like 5 months. Then 2016 February to 2017 February, podcast crazy, like 70% plus. Then go to Korea, 2017 to 2018, podcast crazy, right? Like 70% plus. That was like the majority, right? Immersion. Just like almost the entire time, the majority of me learning Korean was always immersion. Always input, always. Okay, so then in 2018, in like February, this is the 2.5 year mark. I'm back to America, and I came across at that time, right? Like right when I was coming back, when I was ending my trip so like 2018, as I was finishing my trip in Korea, I had found a YouTuber. His name is Matt from Matt vs. Japan. And he's someone who speaks Japanese insanely well. And he, just like Steve Kaufman, says input is king. Input is everything, right? This is becoming a trend in my mind. It really is like solidifying as this is the way to learn language, right? And look, oh my God, that's what I've been doing. I've been doing input. Okay, cool, right? Like I got lucky because I just listen. I'm very gullible. I just listen to like, oh, people say this is how you do it. Okay, cool, let's do it. Steve Kaufman said it, and it got really good, like paid really good dividends. And so I was like, yeah, all right, cool. It seems to be working. Matt vs. Japan said the same thing. I was like, man, yeah, it seems to be working. Okay, cool. But Matt vs. Japan had this really, really interesting video where he talked about watching without subtitles. Now, in Korean, you guys know my channel, I always say 시청, and that means watching and listening at the same time. In English, there's no good word for this. There's listening, and there's watching, and then there's watching and listening. Now, in the language learning world, people always call 시청 listening. It's not. It's different. People always call it's so much different. Watching a show with a visual stimulus versus just listening is so insanely different. To call them the same thing is like, I think like offensive. It's not offensive. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So going forward in English, when I'm talking about 시청, I will just say watching, right? Watching. And then for 듣기, I will just say listening, right? So just watching, listening is basically 시청, 듣기, okay? Separate, two entirely separate things, completely different things. I saw Matt vs. Japan video, and this is at my 2.5 year mark, and he said, in some video, he was explaining that he watched a lot of content without subtitles, raw anime, something like this. He was learning Japanese, and he explained this basically that like he called it. I think I remember. He called it active listening versus passive listening. He said active listening was watching a show and listening, right? Watching a person speak and listening. He called this active listening. And then he said listening to like a podcast, or listening to the radio, like just having like earphones in, just this. He called that passive listening. Okay. Yeah, decent terminology, but I think it's dumb. Not like, I don't think him thinking that is dumb. I just think when you look at it, it's like, no, it's not active. It's watching and then listening. So much easier, so much better, right? Such a better watching. It tells you everything. Now, that's always been the issue with this channel and like the immersion. There's no like 시청 is really good. Also in Korean, it's like a really good word. But the issue with that is that if you say 시청, it sounds like just digital content. It sounds like you're just talking about Netflix, just talking about YouTube. No, I'm talking about real life. When I say 시청, right? Usually this channel's in Korean. I'm talking about digital 시청 and real life 시청. So let's put this in English because the terminology is important. It doesn't matter if you're watching something digitally or you're watching someone in real life. It's both the same, watching, okay? Does not matter. So when I'm talking about watching and listening, I'm talking about watching people in real life, maybe you're in the country, speaking, watching real people in real life speaking, or watching digital content. That's the same, watching. No difference. And then listening is just, you can't really listen in real life, right? You can't really just listen in real life, but you can always, listening is always almost digital, right? Radio, well, maybe it'd be radio, but you have radio, podcasts. You're almost always listening digitally. So I want to make this very clear. Watching and listening are two entirely different. What's the good word? I don't know the word for 활동 in English right now. Watching and listening are two entirely different language activities. They're so different. What I had been doing up until 2.5 years of Korean was just listening. I barely watched anything. I think I watched like one show, 별에서 온 그대. I think I watched that, and I think I watched like 1 or 2 episodes with the subtitles on, and then I turned the subtitles off because they were annoying me. Just like, I don't like subtitles in general. I think having subtitles on a movie is just like trash. I really think it's a bad way to enjoy a movie. You might as well read a book. Like, why? The whole point of a movie or a show is the visual part of it. Why would you? I'm a stickler. That's my thing. It's a generational thing too, maybe. I don't like subtitles on any visual content unless the audio quality is bad. However, watching and listening are so different. They are so different. Try to tell me they're the same. Now, up until that 2.5 year mark, 2018, right around January, February, when I was coming back to America, I had found Matt vs. Japan on YouTube. And he said, he was emphasizing how important it is to watch material without subtitles. Okay, that is just watching, right? Right. We're gonna call watching something without subtitles watching. Because if you have subtitles on, you're reading, not watching. Okay. And it's a reading activity, not a watching activity. So, going forward, when I say the word watching, it means without subtitles. Okay? So, he was emphasizing how important it is to watch. Because that's like the one time in a language learner's journey that you really are just 100% focused on the material. Right? It's a whole and you're naturally exposed to it, right? Like study, studying is not natural exposure to language. It's an analysis of language. So much different. So that's what he said. He said, when you're watching, whether it's a person in real life, whether it's a natives in real life talking, or digitally, that's when your eyes and your ears are working together to understand the language. Now, I didn't realize that this is basically what was missing from all of the applied sciences when it comes to language acquisition. Because like Stephen Krashen has his whole theory and blah, 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 blah. And yes, language acquisition really only works one way, is when you understand messages, right? But there was something missing always, right? I thought, and yeah, it was watching. You go to just no one emphasizes watching. It doesn't have to be only digital. It could be in real life. Watching people speak, watching natives speak to each other, just like observing a conversation. That's how babies learn, right? And adults do not learn that differently than babies. We all, when we're paying attention to a language and we are understanding messages, then it goes into our brain. That's it. That's simple. Try to say different. That's how we learn a language. It's pretty simple. But you never see this applied in real life. It's like, how do you learn a language? You should watch a whole lot. That's how babies do it. Babies are watching for like 5 years of their whole life. Like the first like 3 or 4 years of a baby's life, they're just watching and listening, that's all they're doing. They're not reading. They're not looking stuff up on a trend. They're just watching it the whole time. Eyes, ears, eyes, ears, eyes, ears. But no language learners do that. Why? Because we as a whole people have been really dumb about the whole thing in terms of applying it. Back when like we kind of understood how adults learn the same way, like in the 70s or something, I don't remember. It's like digital age didn't exist, so you can't just pick up a phone and start watching stuff. You can't just fly to another country and just be with natives and watch them. You can't, because it didn't exist. Now we have phones, and I could just Netflix, I'm watching already. Boom, right there. Just like a baby. Easy. That didn't exist years and years and years ago, which is why the education has been this the way it is. Because no one wants to, and also a big part of it is that if you're a language teacher, right? Imagine you said all my students have to do is watch shows or watch natives speak all the time. That's all they have to do. Then it would feel like your job is useless. So that's why education still is the way it is. And then testing is also a thing. Testing, blah, blah, blah. People just they don't know the literature really. And I'm not someone who thinks I know the literature. I know the people who are saying this is the literature. Stephen Krashen, right? These are people who are study this and say how we learn languages. And so interpreting it the right way is really important. And I've interpreted it, in my opinion, the right way. Yeah, it's very simple. Watch a lot, listen a lot, and then when you're good at the language, read a lot. This is what most of the actual professionals get wrong. They think you should read from the start. That's just dumb. Anyway, Matt vs. Japan explained, wow, watching is so important. It is so important because that's when you're really just one-on-one with the language. You get visual and auditory stimulus at the same time, and that's everything. That is what you really need mostly at the beginning stages. And I was like, oh, that's so true. I never noticed that. So then when I came back to America that year, it's the year and a half, I just was I'm going to watch all the time as much as possible. So basically for that next year or year and a half, I just watched one Korean movie every single night before I went to bed for 2 hours straight. And it was hard to understand. I didn't understand really much anything because movies are actually difficult to understand. However, every single piece of content that you ever get exposed to is going to have 90% of the language you need in that content to understand the language. Whether the movie's really difficult or really easy, 90% of actually all the language you use is going to be the most common, 3,000, 5,000 words in the language. The issue is understanding those 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words, not the really hard vocabulary, but the common vocabulary. Most foreign languages are bad at a language because they don't know how to use the common vocabulary because they're not using their eyes and ears to understand it, right? They're not allowing their brains to just absorb the language. So I didn't realize how important this was, but for the second year and a half, there's 3 things that changed about my language learning process. 1, I added watching into my regimen. Up until then, 2.5 years, just like listening, basically, right? Just listening. No watching. Like none. I just didn't do it. I didn't know it was the thing. And then I saw that video and I was like, oh my God. So then that next year, watching at least like 2 hours a day, at least, right? And that's like huge because if you're paying attention to something for 2 hours straight, that's like your brain is gonna go through some crazy changes, I'll tell you. Because our brains are wired to understand language, and that's the best way to get it. Eyes, ears, eyes, ears, eyes, ears. Doesn't matter if it's digital, doesn't matter if it's in real life. Both are better. If you could do both, even better. Eyes, ears, eyes, ears, eyes, ears. So for the next year, I did that, right? 2 years, about 2 hours a day. About 2 hours a day of watching movies almost every day. Almost. I'm sorry. Maybe it was like every other day. So maybe it was like 180 movies in like a year, something like that. Maybe it was like every other day. That makes more sense actually. So I did that. That's one thing. I added watching into my daily routine. I kept listening to podcasts all the time. Kept listening to podcasts. And what I would do then is I would, let me just give the quick review. At that point, at that 3rd year mark, I had still been trying to dabble with Anki and memorizing words for a little bit, but my memory is getting a little clouded now because there's some weird overlap. But here's the 4 things that I did. I think it's 4 things. I stopped using a translator. I realized translation was ruining my understanding of Korean. So I threw out no more translator. If I'm going to look up words, I'm just going to look them up in a Korean dictionary, right? That's it. Or Google Images, okay? Still recommend that. So that 2.5 year mark, stopped using a translator, started watching, and I stopped trying to memorize words and grammar. So I stopped trying to study words and grammar. I stopped trying to memorize it too. I stopped using a translator, and I started watching. And that year, and I obviously continued my podcast flow, is what I'm going to call it. And that year is when I saw the most growth. I finally started to understand the language like kind of like naturally because I'd finally been using my eyes to understand all these sounds I was hearing, right? This is how I interpret that. I stopped using a translator. Why is that so good? Because now if I learned a word that I didn't understand, I could just look at the synonym in Korean or a Google image related to that. And I stopped trying to memorize words. I realized there's no freaking point in memorizing a word, right? Like, what is the point in memorizing words? Like, if you really think about it, it's like, for what? If you're going to end up saying a word a lot, right? If you're going to end up saying a word so much that you feel like you need to memorize it, you're probably just going to naturally, in conversation, right? Let's say, for example, in conversation, that word's going to keep coming up. And so if you're with a native and you're having like a meaningful conversation and you don't remember a word, you'll 1, figure out a different way to say it, or 2, the native will end up helping you say it. What's the point in memorizing it? Like, there's really no point, actually, in my opinion. But anyway, because we're talking about learning a language to a native degree here for yourself, not for some test, not for anybody, for yourself, right? So yeah, that in that 2.5 year mark, I started watching. I threw away the translator. I stopped trying to memorize words and study grammar. And that year made Korean so much easy. Now, one of the fun things I would like to do is this. What I really enjoyed doing was this. I basically, let me get some more. Is there more water in here? There is. Got a lot of water. ASMR, ASMR, mar. Yeah. I like the sound of water. It's nice. What was I just saying? I saw the most growth during that year. And so, what I really, really like to do, and if you're at a intermediate level, I suggest doing this. It's a very fun way to be exposed to content, is watch a movie, right? Then listen to the movie, right? Like listen just the audio of the movie you watched. Then listen to a bunch of podcasts talking about that movie, right? And then go on YouTube and watch a bunch of videos on people talking about that movie, right? This is really cool because you get to see the movie from like so many different perspectives. You see the movie, then you listen to the movie, then you hear a podcast about people talking about the movie. You can learn about the culture that way. This is what I was doing a lot. And you just get this like really awesome synergy of podcasts, movie, audio, and then this was like what I did a lot. Okay. Then on the 3.5 year mark, right? So now it's been 3.5 years since I learned Korean. I went back to Korea, right? 2019, like February. And I basically kept the same strategy. I kept watching a lot of stuff without subtitles, right? But then, and I kept continue doing my podcast flow. I kept only looking up words using I didn't use a translator anymore since that point. Since the 2.5 year mark, I stopped using a translator, right? And it was the best thing I ever did. Awesome. So hyped about that. But yeah, the 3.5 year mark, it's been 3.5 years since I learned Korean and I go to Korea. I continue watching without subtitles and I continue my podcast flow. But then around the 4th year mark, like halfway through that, like mid 2019, I began reading heavily, right? I began to start really reading. I had finished, I think, one Korean book before that, like a year or two before that, just because I was like just trying. But like, you know, like it wasn't like part of my like daily thing. It was like a month or two long thing. But the 4th year mark, so it's like mid 2019, I started reading heavily, right? And I just was reading what is it called? Novels. I was just into novels. I thought that's the best way to read. So I would just read novels all the time and just read all the time. So I had been watching a lot and I kept watching, but then I would start to read a lot. And so the 4th year, around mid 2019, I started reading like crazy. And so then around the 4.5 year mark, I went back to America and I continued to read heavily. I continued to do the podcast flow, just always listen to podcast flow. And then in 2020, right? 2020 in April, I started YouTube. So basically from like mid 2019, which is the 4th year. So when I was learning Korean, it's been 4 years since I started Korean. And then I started to really read heavily. Like I was just like trying to devour books as much as possible. And in that year, I don't know how many books I've read, maybe like 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. But that's a lot of reading for someone who's not been a reader before. And so in the 4.5 year mark, so 2020, like December, right? 2020, December. It's been 4.5 years since I learned Korean. And I had just been devouring books for the past 6 months. I went back to America and it's 2021, January, and still devouring books up until like April, right? So almost like a year-ish, 10 months, 11 months of like just like destroying books, trying to read as much as possible. Continuously, always listening to podcasts, always. That's always been the thing I did most. That was always the majority of my time, listening to podcasts, because it's the easiest thing you could do. You just pop in headphones in AirPods, whatever the hell they're called, and you're just listening all the time. Like literally, when I finish this episode, boom, turn this off. I just pop these in and listen to a podcast about coffee if I want. It's the easiest thing you could ever do. So I'm always just listening all the time. Of course, if you're a beginner, what would objectively be the best content to listen to would be stuff you've watched, the audio from that, right? Just listen to the audio all the time. That would be the best, but whatever you want to listen to is your choice. Had I known that watching stuff and then listening to the audio would have been that effective, like in the beginning, I would have done that over podcasts. That's what I would have done 100%. But I didn't know, I didn't know it was such a good idea. So then I'm doing that for Japanese now. And now in Japanese, I'm starting to actually start learning podcasts. Listening to podcasts at this time of recording. And we'll talk about that in another episode, maybe in another meetup. But anyway, sorry. I digress. It's the 4.5 year mark. And I'm back in America. And for that next couple of months, reading heavily, doing my podcast, and then around April. Does that make sense? Hold on, wait a minute. Something doesn't make sense here. I understand. I see what I did wrong. I got back to my 4.5 year mark. I'm sorry. I'm not going to edit this, unfortunately. But no, just hear me out. Ready? 2019, when I got there in February, was the 3.5 year mark of me learning Korean. I've been learning for 3.5 years. 2019, December, I got back to America, right? Okay. That's about the 4th year mark. Someone's going to have to help me with math. That's about the 4th year mark, if I'm doing my math correctly. 2019, December, I get back to America. And then 2020, right? 2020, January. The next 6 months, I'm continuing to read heavily, podcast flow. Okay? Podcast flow. Then 2020, April. Around April is when I started YouTube. That's when I started YouTube. And when I started YouTube, again, I was still trying to devour books, right? Devour books. Before, when I said nothing's changed. Yeah, 2020. 2020, from like January, February, March, April, just still devouring books. Started YouTube. Wanted to look smart, so I made sure I kept reading, right? And podcast flow. I stopped watching so much. At that point, I stopped watching so much, and it was just because of time. I started making videos, and I stopped doing a lot of watching, but I would continue to listen, and I would continue to read. Reading became like the main like active thing. And then so that for that next year, that's pretty much what I did. So like for like a year and a half, right? From like 2019 August up until like 2021 January, which would be about the 5th year mark, the 5.5 year mark. I was just reading a lot. That was like the main activity that got my language up like crazy. Like reading made me feel very smart, but it also like showed me all the things I didn't know up until that point. So from like the 3.5 year mark to like the 5th year or the 5.5 year mark, take a couple months. Basically like reading for like a year and a half, just trying to devour books all the time, just trying to read as much as possible. And again, always listening though. Again, that was still the main thing I did. Okay. Now it's 2021, January, and I'm in America still. It's like Corona, right? Corona times. And I stopped caring about reading. I stopped caring about Korean input. and I started focusing on YouTube, not just this channel, but like that's a long separate story. A lot of different stuff. But I kept listening. I kept listening to podcasts. I just like podcasts. It's a fun thing for me. Oh, audiobooks. Throughout this time, actually, when I was reading, I would listen to audiobooks too. But I just find podcasts to be a little more entertaining because it's real people speaking. So personally, for me, they're nice. But yeah, I've listened to a lot of audiobooks too, right? And yeah. So 2021 January, it's about the 5.5 year mark of me learning Korean. I had been learning Korean for about 5.5 years now. And I stopped caring about reading. I stopped caring about input. I started focusing on YouTube and basically through YouTube speaking a lot of Korean, just like writing and writing, like making scripts, trying all that, whatever. But I always continue listening to stuff, listening to podcasts. But at the 5.5 year mark, I basically stopped caring about improving my Korean. And I think even though my Korean has gotten better since that time, I could be amazing right now, but I'm like, okay. That's how I kind of like view it. Because from 2021, so 5.5 years of learning Korean like a madman, and it's been 8 years and 8 months recording this now. I started learning Korean 8 years and 8 months ago. But the first 5.5 years, insane amounts of input. 70%, 80% of almost all the time I've been exposed to Korean is input, right? I did that for like 5.5 years. But from the 5.5 year to now, so for the past, why did I say past like that? From the past, that's a weird accent. I usually say past, but I said past. Anyway, from the 5.5 year to the 8 month year mark. So 6.5, 7.5, 8. For the past 3.5 years, oh no, I'm sorry. For the past 3 years, I've done like nothing. I've done like nothing in Korean at all. But here's the important thing. My Korean is like a part of my life, right? It's a part of my life. So even if I'm not trying to improve my Korean, I'm always watching videos in Korean. I'm always listening. I'm always talking to friends in Korean. And when I say talking is not important. It's hearing is what improves your ability. To a degree, we could talk about the nitty gritty stuff separately. But I have friends who are Korean. My daily life doesn't go without reading or listening or writing or speaking in Korean. It's my daily life. So for the past 3 years, naturally, I've been exposed to Korean, so I'm learning new stuff. But like my level's kind of just been like, my speaking probably has improved. It probably seems that it's improved. My comprehension's probably been just about the same though, because I haven't really been exposing myself to like new diverse stuff really in the past 3 years. For the past 3 years, I've been lazy when it comes to getting better at Korean. But it's so I've been learning for 8-9 years. Let's call it 9. Let's just say 9 years. I've been learning for 9 years, but for the past 3.5 years, 3.5 years, I've just been chilling. I haven't really been trying to improve my Korean. I've been trying to improve my video making skills, but not my Korean. And that's kind of when I started YouTube is when my Korean has kind of like started to be less important to me. Ironically enough, I do only YouTube in Korean. It doesn't mean it didn't improve since then. It doesn't mean I'm still not. It just means since that point, I kind of stopped caring about what am I Canadian? About getting so good. I don't know why. It just happened just as a time management thing. I think that's the thing. I haven't really tried to improve my Korean ability. Although at times I'm like, oh, I really want to get better at Korean. It'd be nice. Recently, as of recording this video, I just started reading again for the first time in a long time. Feels great. Feels awesome. I love reading. But here's the thing I want to wrap this up with, right? I want to say a couple of things. I've learned Korean. recording this video right now, right? 2015, August is when I started. So as of recording this video, it's been 8 years and 8 months. But let's just call that 9 years. Let's round up, right? Okay. I've been learning Korean for 9 years. Past 3.5 years, lazy, not trying to improve my Korean. However, for the past 9 years, I don't think I've gone one day without hearing Korean, like listening to Korean, watching Korean, reading. Like there has been it's part of my everyday life. Even though I'm here in New York right now, it's just part of my life, right? It's part of my life. So if you're exposed to it all the time, you're going to improve naturally. You would hope. But that's if it's natural exposure, like real language, not like fake stuff. Fake stuff like grammar books. So here's a couple things I want to say. Throughout the whole time, whenever this whole 9 years, I know a lot of people, oh, you speak so well. Well, it's because one, I've literally spent so many thousands and thousands of hours watching and listening to how people do this, right? So it's like if you know a song, you don't have to memorize it. You can start humming the melody of a song because you've heard it enough. Same thing. Anytime I spoke, right? Here's the important thing. Whenever I speak a lot, I love speaking. I love talking to people. It's how you communicate. It's how I'm an extrovert. I like talking to people. It gives me energy. But except for the first 5 months of me learning Korean, since then, I haven't really tried to practice Korean. I've tried shadowing a total of 2 hours maybe. I've tried intonation practice, boring. Like every time I've tried to practice speaking, it's like so utterly boring. I'd rather just like not. I'd just rather not. I've talked a lot. I talk to people all the time. If I have the opportunity to talk to someone in Korean that I'm interested in, I'll take the opportunity. And yes, you learn through experience, right? You learn through that. But if you're personally like, oh, I need to, when should I practice? Don't practice speaking. Don't practice speaking. It's pointless. Whatever you have to say is not that important. You know what I mean? Like if you just take that, it's like, don't practice, but have conversations. Have meaningful conversations. Don't hire a teacher. Don't hire a teacher so that you could just talk at them. What is that? If by chance you're on a website and there's like teachers that you can like, buy their hour with and have a conversation, make sure you genuinely like are interested in that person. If you're using a language exchange app, make sure you're genuinely interested in what they have to say. Make sure that it could be an interesting relationship, right? Like talk to people who are interested in the same things you like. If you like going to the movies or if you like going to museums, have conversations with people who are into those things. Don't just talk at people. Don't just practice. No one wants to hear your words are not that important. You're not that important, right? Especially when you can't even string a sentence together. Instead, look for meaningful relationships. If you like basketball and on a language exchange app, you find that this person loves playing basketball, loves talking about basketball, hit them up and say, hey, I really like basketball. Like, I'd love to talk about it. Like, I don't know what like Americans think about basketball and I'm learning English. So like, can we talk about basketball? Can you show me like what like, then you have a meaningful conversation. And through meaningful conversation, you'll naturally be interested. And when you're interested, you pay attention. When you pay attention, you learn the language, right? And the people as well are going to be patient and interested in what you have to say. Because even if you can't string a sentence together, they're going to help you and they're going to want to know your perspective. But when you're if you're practicing a language, it's for most parties pretty boring. If you're just trying to have a meaningful conversation, that's so different. So yeah, if you have the opportunity to speak to someone and you both are actually interested in the conversation, do it. It's awesome. Make friends, get out there in the world and connect. Have meaningful conversations. Don't practice the language. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, so this is basically how I learned Korean. I hope this episode was useful to you guys. And if you don't have time right now, save this next video to your watch later playlist. So when you do have time, grab a cup of coffee and give it a watch. That action alone helps the I Speak Korean Pretty Well podcast quite a lot. Thank you.